The trauma drone in Bay 3 came online with a soft chime, and Tharlos had not yet looked up. He was watching the small human in the center of the kill box. She was standing with her hands at her sides, chin level, heart rate reading 52 beats per minute on his overhead display. The number was wrong. The Vanguard squad surrounding her weighed a combined 1,800 kilograms of chitin and dense muscle, and her heart rate read 52. Tharlos had spent 11 years in the Overwatch booth. He had never, in those 11 years, seen a biometric reading that calm at the start of an asymmetrical gauntlet. His dorsal ridges pulsed a slow, comfortable violet. He reached for the abort switch and rested 3 fingers on it, because that was his job, and because the records showed a 91% critical trauma rate for unarmored species attempting this exercise. He was not worried, he was prepared. The girl did not look prepared. She looked like she was waiting for a meal to finish cooking. Cadet Prime Gorv of the Dravari stepped forward from the circle. His mandibles came together once, a sharp, dry click that the arena mic picked up and broadcast to every betting screen in the hall. He looked at her the way a structural engineer looks at a wall he is about to knock down. Her skeletal density is a rounding error, he said, loudly enough that the nearest drone registered it as ambient dialogue. Prime the splints before she snaps. The gallery above the kill box stirred, wages updated in real time. Tharlos's fingers did not move from the abort switch. The girl reached up with her left hand and pulled a bright blue scrunchie from her wrist. She gathered her hair, twisted it once, secured it at the back of her head, and dropped her hand to her side. The whole motion took about 4 seconds. Then the buzzer sounded. The record showed her arrival time as 14 minutes before the exercise was scheduled. Tharlos had noticed it, but filed it as a clerical anomaly. 3 hours earlier, in the intake corridor off Level 2, Tharlos had pulled Sienna's biometric file for the first time. The booth had been quiet. His ridges had been violet, the way they always were on slow mornings, pulsing in a lazy rhythm that his colleagues had learned to read as nothing is happening and nothing will. He had a thermos of mineral broth at his elbow, still steaming. He opened the file, expecting the standard new enrollment summary: species, world of origin, skeletal grade, trauma probability index. What he got instead was a flag. A small amber icon in the upper corner of the display. He tapped it. Advisory: candidate presents with atypical density index. Manual confirmation recommended before contact clearance. He confirmed it manually. The skeletal density reading came back the same. He confirmed it a second time. It came back the same again. He set it down to calibration drift and made a note in the system log. The Aegis Prime biometric scanners were 4 years old. They drifted. Tharlos took a long pull from his thermos and moved on to the trauma probability index. It read high. He marked her for priority drone coverage and closed the file. His ridges kept their violet. By the time Sienna walked through the Level 2 corridor and into the prep staging area, Tharlos had primed 2 full drone bays, loaded a secondary analgesic reserve, and adjusted the abort threshold from the standard 4-second delay to 2 seconds. He watched her cross the staging area on his secondary feed. She was not rushing. She was not scanning the room for threats the way new cadets did. She reached the far wall, checked the numbered floor panel to confirm she was in the right lane, and waited. Her heart rate on the feed read 54. He thought, this will be fast. He did not mean it as a compliment. The Vanguard squad arrived in formation 7 minutes later. 5 Dravari. They moved the way their species always moved, which was deliberately and with the slight forward lean that was equal parts posture and threat. Cadet Prime Gorv led them. He was the largest, which among Dravari meant something specific, not just taller, but denser, the kind of mass that registered in a room before the door had finished opening. His chitin plating ran from his shoulder joints to the outer ridges of both forearms, a natural armor grade that the Academy's intake system listed as exceptional, non-supplemented. Tharlos watched him look at Sienna. Gorv looked at her the way the whole room was looking at her. which was with the specific kind of mild curiosity a predator gives a thing it has already decided is not worth full attention. Unarmored, he said to no one in particular, Garden World. One of his squad made a sound that might have been a laugh. Tharlos made a small adjustment to the pain block dosage on the drone presets, bumping it up by a third. He was thinking about the 91% figure. He was thinking about the fact that this girl did not have a single layer of natural chitin or hardened plate or the subcutaneous mineral deposits that even some soft-world species managed. She had skin. She had bone. The density of the bone was apparently a rounding error, per the system's own output, and Tharlos was beginning to feel the particular tension of a medical professional who has done everything correctly and is still fairly certain something bad is about to happen. His thermos was empty. He did not notice. The Sector 7 kill box filled as the gallery overhead opened its upper rose to the general cadet population. Tharlos could see them on his crowd feed, settling into the observation rails, pulling up the betting interface on their personal slates. The algorithms were already running. He did not look at the odds. In 11 years, he had learned that looking at the odds before a medical event was bad for concentration. The floor panels lit in sequence. Hard light boundaries rose along the perimeter of the kill box, casting a faint blue-white edge around the space. The arena's biometric overlay went live on Tharlos's primary screen, pulling real-time data from every combatant: heart rate, muscle tension, bone stress index, adrenal levels. He scanned the 5 Dravari first. Their readings were what he expected: elevated adrenal, baseline muscle tension high, the way it always was with their body type. Gorv's bone stress index showed the green and amber pattern of a combatant in peak condition. Then he checked Sienna. Heart rate 52. No adrenal spike, no elevated tension. The bone stress index was pulling the same anomalous density number it had pulled in the file, which meant it was probably still drifting, and the girl's biometrics looked less like a combatant entering an asymmetrical engagement and more like someone sitting in a waiting room. Tharlos set 2 fingers on the abort switch, a precaution. Gorv walked to the center of the floor and addressed the gallery rather than Sienna, which was itself a statement. The Vanguard Protocol, he said, the way someone recites a thing they have recited many times, exists to show what happens when the wrong species applies for the wrong track. He clacked his mandibles once for the crowd. The margin for error in the field is 0. The lesson is not complicated. The gallery responded with the low hum that crowds in enclosed spaces make when they agree. Sienna was watching Gorv the way a person watches a clock, not with hostility, not with fear, with mild patience, the expression of someone who has heard this particular speech before and is waiting for the relevant part to start. She reached up, checked the scrunchie at the back of her head, and dropped her hand. I just don't want to tear the uniform, she said, conversationally, not to Gorv specifically, to no one in particular. The nearest gallery row went quiet. Tharlos noted the resting heart rate, still 52. His own ridges, he realized, had shifted slightly, still violet, but the pulse was faster now, shorter intervals. He filed that away somewhere he would examine later. A betting notification pinged on his secondary screen. He closed it without reading it. The arena's countdown display reached 0. The buzzer hit, a single flat tone that bounced off the hard light boundaries and came back slightly flattened by the echo. Gorv moved. He was fast for his size, which was the thing about Dravari that most unarmored species failed to account for. The mass did not slow them the way logic suggested it should. His lunge carried his full body weight forward in a tight line, both arms driving for her ribcage, the kind of double impact strike that the Academy's own Strike Force Index rated in the upper tier of non-lethal damage potential. The bone stress projections on Tharlos's screen populated automatically: projected impact, rib fracture, likely multiple, pulmonary compression, probable, time to intervention, 0.8 seconds. Tharlos's hand closed on the abort switch. Sienna stepped half a pace to her left. Not away, slightly off the centerline, barely a foot of lateral movement, smooth and unhurried, as though she had read the precise angle of Gorv's approach and simply moved off it the way you step around a puddle. Her right hand came up, two knuckles pressed briefly against the side of Gorv's thorax as his own momentum carried him past her. The contact lasted less than a quarter of a second. Gorv hit the floor. Not a stumble, not a loss of footing. He went down full length, flat, his chitin plates ringing against the mat like something heavy dropped from a shelf, and he did not move again except for a slight, involuntary tremor in his left leg. The arena was silent. On Tharlos's primary screen, Gorv's biometrics showed neural interrupt, lower cervical, temporary, not lethal, but complete. Motor function below the neck had flatlined in a single second. The nerves along that thoracic cluster shut down as cleanly as a switch thrown. Tharlos stared at the readout. He tapped it. The readout did not change. He looked at the remaining 4 cadets in the kill box. They had stopped moving. If you want to hear what a room sounds like when it decides to stop making sound, stay close. 400 kilograms of Dravari was still on the floor of the kill box, and Sienna had not moved from the spot where she'd stepped off the center line. She was standing in the same easy posture she'd held since the buzzer. Her left hand had come up to check the scrunchie again, briefly, then dropped. The 4 remaining cadets exchanged something in the compressed body language of their species. Tharlos knew enough Dravari nonverbal to recognize it, not retreat, not hesitation. Recalculation, the kind of split-second processing that happens when a confident prediction fails so completely and so fast that the brain needs a moment to update. They updated. They spread. They did not come at her one at a time. They came in a wave, which was the correct tactical response and also what Tharlos had been dreading, because 4 Dravari in simultaneous motion represented a problem that no single unarmored body should be able to solve cleanly. His hand was back on the abort switch. His ridges were no longer violet. The 4 of them moved as one body. That was the thing about Dravari squad tactics that Tharlos had always found professionally interesting and personally distressing. The species did not require a signal to synchronize. Some neural proximity thing, a shared pressure response, a feature of pack origin evolution that the Academy's xenobiology intake documented in a single paragraph, and that became immediately relevant when you were watching it happen from an Overwatch booth with one hand on an abort switch. They spread to cover the full diameter of her reach, then closed. Tharlos watched his primary screen. Sienna's heart rate, 52. He tapped the display. The number did not move. He had been a medical prefect for long enough to know that a heart rate of 52 beats per minute in the first seconds of a multi-party physical engagement was not a calibration drift. Calibration drift produced noise, small variance, random spikes. 52 was not noise. 52 was a reading from an organism that had looked at 4 Dravari closing in from 4 directions and decided, at the cellular level, that this did not require additional blood flow. He had never seen that before. He left his hand on the switch and watched. First cadet reached her with an overarm strike, full weight behind it, the kind of impact that the training floor's pressure sensors would have recorded as extraordinary for a non-augmented combatant. She was not where it landed. She had moved not back, not sideways, but through, a small step inside the arc of the swing that took her from the outside of the attack to the inside of it, into the space where the arm had just been, the blind spot, the half-second gap between commitment and recovery. Her elbow met the cadet's outstretched arm at the joint. The sound the joint made was specific. A Dravari knee structure is different from a humanoid knee. It has a secondary lateral hinge, a vestigial feature of a 4-limbed locomotion ancestry, and it is not designed to receive lateral force at extension. Tharlos knew this from 11 years of treating Dravari cadets who had landed badly. The cadet went down sideways, clutching the joint, and did not immediately try to get up. Sienna was already somewhere else. The second and third cadets had come in at angles to catch her mid-move. she did not stop moving. She turned the momentum of the second cadet's grab against the trajectory of the third, using one shoulder as a guide point, and the third cadet's own mass carried him into the second at a combined speed that dropped them both and put one of them into the mat face first hard enough that the floor's pressure sensors recorded it on Tharlow's secondary monitor as a significant impact. It was not her impact, she had used their weight. The fourth cadet adjusted, pulling back, trying to create distance and reassess. The correct response. Tharlow noted the reassessment on the biometric feed with the detached professional admiration of a person watching a sensible decision arrive 3 seconds too late. Sienna did not press. She simply waited, balanced, in whatever low-center posture her body had found, while the fourth cadet tried to find an angle that made sense. There was no angle that made sense. Tharlow could see this from the booth. He did not think the fourth cadet could see it yet. He was starting to understand that this was not going to go the way he had prepared for. He kept his hand on the switch. He was not sure anymore who he was going to use it for. The gallery above the kill box had gone the kind of quiet that is different from silence. Silence is an absence. This was a presence. The collective held breath of 400 cadets who had come to watch a foregone conclusion and were now watching something they did not have a category for. The betting algorithms had stopped updating. Tharlow noticed this on his secondary screen. The odds column had frozen mid-calculation. The automated wagering system had an uncertainty threshold, a point at which the projected outcome probability spread so wide across so many variables that the system suspended operations and flagged a supervisor. He had seen it happen twice in 11 years, both times during structural emergencies. It had flagged. He stared at the frozen column, then he looked back at the floor. The fourth cadet had found his angle. He came in low, dropping his center of gravity, going for a leg tackle, the smart move against an opponent who was using his own upright mass against him. Get her horizontal, remove the geometry she was working with. Sienna stepped back a single pace and let his momentum carry through below her. His arms caught nothing, he sprawled. She had not touched him. He had just run out of room and fallen. Tharlow looked at the floor. One cadet prone and unmoving, Gorv, thoracic nerve interrupt, still showing on the biometric as motor function suspended, temporary. One cadet down clutching a joint, 2 cadets on the mat from the 3-body redirect, and 1 cadet face down having failed a tackle on empty space. Sienna was standing in approximately the same spot she had occupied for most of the last 30 seconds. Her sleeve was twisted slightly at the shoulder. She was checking it. Her heart rate had peaked at 61 during the engagement. It was dropping now. The biometric clock in the corner of Tharlow's primary screen logged the elapsed time from the buzzer to the last cadet's fall. He read the number. He read it again. He sat back in his chair. His dorsal ridges, he realized, were the color of old ash. Down in the kill box, Sienna straightened her sleeve, decided it was acceptable, and looked around at the floor with the mild, evaluative expression of someone checking whether they had left anything behind at a table. She had not injured herself. Tharlow's medical scanner confirmed this without ambiguity. Her bone stress index had not moved above baseline, no soft tissue strain, no adrenal residue. The scanner was still pulling the anomalous density reading on her skeleton, but this time Tharlow did not tap the display to check if it would change. He left it where it was. Around her, 5 Dravari cadets were producing the sounds that organisms make when their nervous systems are completing an unexpected and uncomfortable inventory. Gorv's motor function was beginning to return. Tharlow could see it in the twitching biometric feed, the slow restoration of signal along the interrupted cluster. He would be mobile within minutes. He would be in considerable pain for longer. The joint injury on Cadet 2 would need imaging. The 2 cadets from the redirect impact had surface bruising, and one had a probable wrist fracture from the landing. The 4th cadet, the tackle was fine, but had hit the mat chin first and would have a significant headache. 5 cadets. One needed a nerve interrupt observation protocol, One needed imaging, one had a probable fracture. Tharlos was a medical prefect. This was technically a good outcome, no lethal injuries, no internal trauma, nothing that wouldn't heal. He was aware that the good outcome was entirely her decision. She had applied exactly as much force as each situation required and not one fraction more, and the precision of that calibration, across 5 simultaneous threats, across 30 seconds of continuous movement, was not an accident. You did not accidentally stop your strike force at probable wrist fracture. You did not accidentally place 2 knuckles on a thoracic nerve cluster with enough precision to produce a temporary interrupt rather than permanent damage. She had known, every time, exactly what she was doing. Tharlos reached for his thermos, found it empty, remembered it had been empty since the intake corridor, set it back down. He had been a medical prefect for 11 years and had never rerouted his trauma drones away from the unarmored combatant toward the armored ones. He rerouted the trauma drones. He keyed his comm and heard his own voice come out slightly lower than usual. Medical response, Sector 7, combatants down. He looked at the floor, the Vanguard squad. A pause on the other end of the line. He understood the pause. He had the same pause somewhere behind his sternum. Confirmed, he said, the Vanguard squad. In the kill box, Sienna looked up at the Overwatch booth. She could not see Tharlos, the glass was one way, but she looked up in the direction of the monitoring station, the way a person looks at a speaker when the sound has stopped unexpectedly. I'm fine, she said, conversationally, to the booth. She turned her shoulders slightly, checking the seam of her uniform jacket. I think I might have caught the sleeve on something. She looked at the seam. It's fine, it's fine. No one in the gallery said anything. One of the cadets on the floor made a sound. Gorv, motor function returning, had managed to get one arm under himself. Sienna glanced at him with what Tharlos could only describe, from the biometric data, as the same emotional signature she had presented since she walked in. 0 elevation, flat baseline, 52 settling back toward 52. She looked like she was mildly embarrassed about the sleeve. The trauma drones arrived in Sector 7 40 seconds later. They fanned out in the standard pattern, moving toward the highest priority biometric alerts, and every single one of them went to a Dravari cadet. The gallery watched. The gallery had been watching for some time now without producing any of the sounds galleries usually produced. No commentary, no running wager updates, no noise. Someone in the far upper row said something in a low voice. Tharlos could not hear the words, but he saw the heads of the people nearest turn toward the speaker, then back toward the floor, with the slow, careful movement of people who are revising a prior understanding. Tharlos was revising a prior understanding. He pulled Sienna's biometric file back up on his screen, the anomalous density reading, the amber advisory flag, manual confirmation recommended. He had confirmed it twice, attributed it to calibration drift, and moved on. He was looking at it differently now. He thought about the 43 seconds it had taken from the buzzer to the last cadet's fall. He thought about the trajectory of each engagement, the lateral step, the elbow joint, the 3-body redirect, the empty space tackle. He thought about how, if you were to diagram the angles from above, they would look less like a fight and more like a physics demonstration. Like someone had been given the mass and velocity of each attacker in advance and had simply solved for the most efficient outcome. He had a medical degree from the Sirmian Institute. He was not primarily a tactician, but he had been in this booth for 11 years, watching bodies move in this space, and what he had watched for the last 43 seconds did not look like improvisation. It looked like a very easy problem she had been given enough time to work out in advance. His ridges were still ash. He minimized the biometric file. He opened the incident report template, the form he filled after every gauntlet event that produced injuries. He got as far as the field that asked for primary combatant at fault and stopped. He looked at that field for a long moment. Down in the kill box, the trauma drones had surrounded the Vanguard squad with the standard 3-unit casualty formation, and Sienna was standing to one side, out of their path, her hands loose at her sides, watching the drones work with the mild interest of a person observing a process that does not involve them. Her sleeve was no longer twisted. She had fixed it at some point. Tharlos filled in the primary combatant at fault field. His stylus hovered over the field that asked whether the unarmored combatant had required intervention. He filled that field in two. He looked at what he had written. He closed the report without submitting it. He needed to think about how to write this down in a way that the people who received it would understand, and he was not yet sure he understood it well enough himself. What he knew was this: he had primed 2 full drone bays for a human female with a bone density that read as a rounding error and a heart rate that did not know what urgency was. He had set his abort threshold at 2 seconds instead of 4. He had loaded an extra analgesic reserve and positioned himself over the switch for the full duration of the engagement, and he had used none of it not for her. The medical intervention he was now coordinating was for 5 of the most physically capable cadets in the Vanguard program. And the girl who had put them there was standing in the middle of it all, quietly checking the stitching on her sleeve with a heart rate of 52. Something had been wrong with his model of what was going to happen. He was beginning to suspect that the wrong part was not the scanner. The incident report was still open on his screen when the Academy board requested Tharlos's raw telemetry feed. Not a summary, not his written account. The raw feed, every biometric data point, every timestamp, every force vector calculation the arena sensors had logged from the moment the buzzer sounded to the moment the last cadet hit the mat. Tharlos sent it without comment. He had not yet figured out what comment to make. The request had come from the Office of the Vanguard Oversight Committee, which in 11 years had never asked him for a raw telemetry feed. They asked for incident reports. They asked for recovery projections. They asked occasionally for the pain block consumption data when a gauntlet had run unusually long. They did not ask for raw feeds, because raw feeds were the kind of data that required a specialist to interpret, and the committee was not, as a general rule, staffed with specialists. Someone on the committee had decided to find a specialist. Tharlos read the request again. He noticed the timestamp on it, 14 minutes after the last cadet had gone down. The committee had convened in 14 minutes. The standard convening window for a gauntlet incident review was 72 hours. He sent the feed. He went back to the incident report. The cursor was still sitting in the primary combatant at fault field. He thought about the 43 seconds. He thought about the heart rate that had peaked at 61 and was now, per his active monitor, because Sienna was still in the building, still technically under his medical watch, reading 52 again. He submitted the report with the field blank. He would correct it later. He needed to see the raw feed analysis first. 3 floors down from the Overwatch booth, Sienna was sitting on a bench in the medical observation corridor, which was where Tharlos had routed her after the gauntlet ended. Standard post-engagement protocol: unarmored combatants to observation for a minimum of 2 hours, regardless of apparent injury status. She was reading something on a handheld slate, her legs crossed at the ankle, her back straight. The blue scrunchie was back on her wrist. Tharlos watched her on the corridor feed. He watched for about 30 seconds. She turned a page. She did not look up. Her heart rate on his active monitor was 52. He stopped watching the corridor feed and looked at his wall. His office wall had a single data display, the kind that could be toggled between standard biometric output and the broader Aegis Prime system status. He toggled it to system status. He looked at the line that showed the Vanguard program's current enrollment and active gauntlet record. The gauntlet record showed 11 years of results. He had been in this booth for all of them. He had never seen a complete squad outcome in the asymmetrical format, not where the non-Dravari combatant produced a complete squad outcome. He had seen near misses from 2 other species, one a high-gravity world organism that had lasted 4 minutes before a coordinated joint lock brought it down, one a former military combatant who had taken 2 of the squad before taking a rib fracture that ended the round. Complete squad in 43 seconds, without a single injury to the solo combatant. The data display did not have a category for this. It had outcome columns: solo combatant withdrawn / solo combatant incapacitated / mutual incapacitation / squad incapacitation. The last column had, in 11 years, never been filled in. Tharlos looked at the blank column for a moment, then toggled the display back to biometrics. Down the corridor, Sienna turned another page. The committee's specialist arrived at the Overwatch booth 2 hours later. She was a Sirmian, like Tharlos, which meant her ridges were readable, and her ridges when she entered the booth were a flat, careful white, the color his species produced under conditions of concentrated professional attention. She did not introduce herself beyond her department, kinetics analysis, the division that processed force vector data from training incidents. "You sent me the feed," she said. "The committee asked for it," Tharlos said. "I forwarded." "Walk me through what you saw." He walked her through it: the arrival, the biometrics, the buzzer, Gorv's lunge, the step off the centerline, the 2-knuckle contact, the thoracic nerve interrupt, the remaining 4, the elbow joint strike, the 3-body redirect, the empty space tackle, the elapsed time. The specialist listened without interrupting. Her ridges stayed flat white. When he finished, she pulled up the force vector overlay on his primary screen, a visualization of the raw feed data she had apparently already analyzed before arriving. It mapped each contact point as a colored node, with lines showing the angle of applied force and the projected outcome trajectory. Tharlos looked at it. The overlay was almost entirely empty. He understood what he was looking at, but he said it out loud anyway because he needed to hear it. "There's almost nothing there," he said. "Correct," the specialist said. "The force application is," she paused, which was unusual for her species under professional conditions. "The applied force per contact is in a range I normally associate with minor physical interventions, stabilizing a patient, guiding a subject, not combat engagement." "But the outcomes?" "The outcomes are inconsistent with the force applied," she said, "under a standard biomechanical model. The reason they're not inconsistent," she tapped the overlay, highlighting the contact node on the Gorv segment, "is that every single point of contact is anatomically specific to a millimeter: the nerve cluster on the thorax, the lateral hinge on the knee joint. The combined momentum redirect for subjects 2 and 3 used their own mass as the primary kinetic input. Her contribution was directional only." Tharlos looked at the node for Gorv's nerve interrupt. The applied force shown was smaller than he had registered in real time, watching it happen. "She knew exactly where to press," he said. "She knew exactly how hard to press," the specialist said. "That's the part that's..." Another pause. "The force modulation on the thoracic interrupt is controlled to a degree that suggests she was calibrating actively, not hitting hard enough to cause permanent damage, not hitting soft enough to fail the interrupt. The window for that calibration is narrow, very narrow." "She was measuring," Tharlos said. The specialist's ridges shifted. Still white, but a cooler shade, the color his species produced when a professional framework was failing to contain what it was being asked to hold. "She was measuring," she confirmed, "every contact." Tharlos sat with that for a moment. Down in the observation corridor, on his active monitor, Sienna's heart rate was 52. "What does it look like," he said, "when she's not measuring?" The specialist did not answer immediately. Her ridges went very still. "I don't know," she said, "but I think that's the question the committee is trying not to ask out loud." The mundane fact that Tharlos would think about later was this: he had poured himself a fresh thermos of mineral broth at the start of the specialist's visit, set it on the edge of his console, and by the time she left, it had gone cold without either of them touching it. He noticed this after she was gone. He picked up the thermos and looked at it, then he set it back down. His comm lit up. the Vanguard Oversight Committee requesting his presence at a formal review session. Not tomorrow, not in 72 hours. Now, the revised standard, apparently, for incidents that produced a blank outcome column. He locked his booth, took the elevator 3 floors down, and walked past the medical observation corridor on his way to the committee room. Through the corridor window, out of professional habit, he checked his active monitor feed. Sienna was still on the bench. She had finished whatever she was reading. She was looking at the wall with the patient, slightly abstracted expression of someone who has run out of reading material and is not particularly bothered by this. The blue scrunchie was on her wrist, turned twice around it, the synthetic fabric catching the corridor light. Her heart rate was 52. The committee room held 7 members, plus the Aegis Prime director, who had not been in the building for a routine gauntlet session and was now in it. Tharlos noted the director's presence, noted the color of his ridges, a deep amber that Tharlos associated with his own species in conditions of institutional uncertainty, and sat in the chair indicated. The committee's lead member placed the force vector overlay on the central display. "Medical Prefect Tharlos," she said, "in your 11 years in the Aegis Prime Overwatch role, have you observed a complete squad outcome in the asymmetrical gauntlet?" "No," Tharlos said. "Have you observed an unarmored combatant complete the full format without a single intervention from your station?" "No." "In your medical judgment, were the injuries sustained by the Vanguard cadets consistent with the force applied by the solo combatant?" Tharlos looked at the overlay on the display, the almost empty node map, the contact points that were barely there. "No," he said, "they were not." A pause in the room. "Can you explain the discrepancy?" "The specialist from kinetics can explain it better than I can," he said. "What I can tell you from a medical perspective is that every injury the cadets sustained was," he found the right word, "controlled. The nerve interrupt on Cadet Prime Gorv was temporary. The joint injury on Cadet Vesh was a lateral fracture, not a full break. The wrist fracture on Cadet Ren is a standard healing grade injury, nothing that doesn't repair." "She chose those outcomes," the committee lead said. "It was not a question." "The force vector data supports that reading," Tharlos said. "Yes." Another pause. The director's amber ridges had not changed. "If she had not chosen those outcomes," the committee lead said, "what is the kinetics assessment's projection for the alternative scenario?" Tharlos thought about what the specialist had said. "I don't know, but I think that's the question the committee is trying not to ask out loud." "I can tell you what the specialist told me," he said. "She said she didn't know, but that the force modulation data indicated active calibration, active, deliberate calibration of every contact point, which means the calibration was a choice, not a limitation." The room was quiet for a moment that was slightly longer than a professional pause. "She was holding back," the director said. It was the first thing the director had said. His voice was level, which was its own kind of information. "Yes," Tharlos said, "that is the accurate reading." The accurate reading sat in the room for several seconds, without anyone adding to it. Tharlos looked at the force vector overlay. 19 contact points across 43 seconds of engagement. 19 points, each calibrated to produce a specific outcome short of permanent damage. 19 decisions made in the fractions of a second between a Dravari cadet's committed attack and her response to it, in a space where the margin for the wrong choice was not theoretical. She had not made a wrong choice. She had not made a close choice. She had made 19 correct ones in a row, and none of them had moved her heart rate above 61. The director looked at the central display. "What is the Vanguard Protocol's current classification for this outcome type?" he asked, not to Tharlos, to the committee generally. "A long beat." "There is no current classification," the committee lead said. The director's ridges shifted. The amber went darker, a shade Tharlos had no clean word for. "Then we'll need one," the director said, "and we'll need to talk about what we tell the program about engaging human cadets going forward." He looked at Tharlos. What is the cadet doing currently? Sitting in medical observation, Tharlo said. Reading, her biometrics are, he checked his handheld monitor out of reflex. The number was what it always was. Normal. Something moved across the director's face that was not quite an expression. His ridges, briefly, went the color of old ash, the same color Tharlos's had been in the booth. Normal, the director repeated. 52, Tharlo said. Nobody said anything after that for long enough that the room's environmental system completed a full ventilation cycle, which in a sealed committee space took about 20 seconds. Tharlos counted them. The director looked at the force vector overlay for the last of those seconds. Then he looked at the committee lead. Pull her intake file, he said. The full file, origin classification, world of origin data, everything submitted at enrollment. The committee lead pulled it. She placed it on the central display beside the force vector overlay. Tharlos had seen Sienna's file. He had flagged the density anomaly, confirmed it twice, attributed it to drift. He looked at it now with different eyes. Origin, Earth. Homeworld classification, Class 3, standard biosphere, no extremophiles markers, no enhanced gravity adaptation, no documented combatant lineage. The director read the classification line. He read it again. His ridges had gone a shade Tharlos could not name, not amber, not ash, something between the two that his species apparently produced when a category was failing in real time. Class 3, the director said. That is what the file shows, the committee lead said. And she produced this. He indicated the force vector overlay without touching it, the way you indicate a thing you are not yet ready to handle directly. The room waited. Someone needs to contact the enrollment verification office, the director said. I want the homeworld classification confirmed through the primary registry, not the candidate's submitted documentation. He looked at Tharlos. In your medical opinion, the density anomaly, the calibration data, does it read as a Class 3 organism? Tharlos thought about the anomalous flag, the two manual confirmations he had filed as drift, the heart rate of 52 through 30 seconds of multi-party combat engagement. No, he said, it does not. The enrollment verification response came back in 11 minutes, which was fast. The standard processing window was 48 hours. The committee lead read it. Her ridges, a species Tharlos did not know well, a prolari from the mid-cluster, went the color of old paper. She read it aloud. Earth's homeworld classification was updated 14 months ago. Current classification, Class 7, high-density biosphere, documented extremophile-adjacent baseline. The update was flagged for propagation to all institutional enrollment databases. She paused. The propagation did not complete to the Aegis Prime intake system. The record in our system was not updated. The room was very still. The record we enrolled her against, the committee lead said, was 14 months out of date. Tharlos sat with this. 14 months. He had seen her file and read Class 3 and thought, soft world, garden world, this will be fast. Gorv had looked at her and said garden world and clacked his mandibles and told the gallery to prime the splints. The Vanguard protocol's entire confidence in the outcome of the asymmetrical gauntlet had rested on a classification that had not been current for 14 months. The biometric clock on the arena's system had logged the strike sequence, the precise window from Gorv's lunge to the last cadet's fall, not the full 43 seconds. The strike sequence itself, 4.2 seconds. 4.2 seconds to dismantle 1,800 kilograms of armored, Apex-class combatants, using a classification file that said she came from a garden world, while her heart rate stayed at 52. Tharlos thought about the specialist's question, what does it look like when she's not measuring? He did not say it out loud, he did not need to. The director had gone very quiet. His ridges had settled into a flat, neutral gray that Tharlos had only seen his own species produce in one other context, the moment after a diagnosis that changes a prognosis entirely. Not panic, recalibration. the specific stillness of an organism absorbing new information and understanding that the old framework is gone. Class 7, the director said. Confirmed, the committee lead said. And she behaved as though the gauntlet was, he appeared to search for the word. A minor scheduling inconvenience, Tharlo said. The phrase came from somewhere, and after a moment he placed it. It was the exact impression he had had in the booth, watching her check her sleeve while the trauma drones fanned out around the people she had put on the floor. The director looked at him. Yes, Tharlo said, that is how she behaved. They released Sienna from medical observation at the end of the standard 2-hour window. Tharlos walked down to the observation corridor himself, which was not standard protocol, but which felt, under the circumstances, necessary. She was where she had been, on the bench, hands in her lap, looking at the wall with the mild patience of someone who has waited longer than this and found it unremarkable. The blue scrunchie was on her wrist. Cadet, he said. She looked up. Her expression was the same expression she had worn in the kill box, and in the committee summary he had been given 20 minutes earlier, and in the intake corridor that morning. Present, attentive, untroubled. You're cleared for dismissal, he said. Thank you, she said. She stood, straightened her jacket, the seam she had checked in the kill box, the one she had worried about, and picked up her slate from the bench. She looked at him for a moment, not with challenge, not with anything particular, the way a person looks at someone who has been doing their job conscientiously and deserves acknowledgement for it. The guys from the squad, she said, are they okay? They will recover fully, he said. Good, she said, simply, without any particular heat, as though this was the correct outcome and she had expected it to be the correct outcome. I didn't want to, she paused. I was trying not to tear my uniform. He looked at her for a moment. You mentioned that, he said. The seam came loose anyway, she said. She showed him the shoulder seam of the jacket, a small section of stitching that had separated, barely visible. A little bit. I see, he said. She smoothed the jacket back into place and tucked her slate under her arm. Is there anything else you need from me? She said. He thought about the committee room, the force vector overlay, the enrollment verification response, the number that had come back from the primary registry. He thought about 19 contact points across 4.2 seconds, each calibrated to a millimeter, each stopping precisely short of permanent damage. No, he said, that will be all. Okay, she said, thanks for the bench. She said this without irony, with the mild, genuine courtesy of someone who means it. Then she walked down the corridor toward the exit, her footsteps even and unhurried, the blue scrunchie turning once on her wrist as she pushed through the door. Tharlos watched the door close. Her heart rate on his handheld monitor. She was still technically within his medical range until she cleared the building, was 52. He looked at the bench where she had been sitting. She had left nothing behind. The bench was exactly as it had been before she sat on it, except for the faint compression in the padding that would recover in a few minutes. He looked at the door. Then he went back to the Overwatch booths. On his console, the blue scrunchie was where she had set it after the gauntlet. He had not noticed her do it, but it was there, on the edge of the diagnostic panel, where she must have placed it during the post-gauntlet period when he was occupied with the telemetry. Bright blue synthetic fabric, turned twice, the elastic worn slightly at one side. He picked it up. He held it for a moment. He thought about the betting algorithms freezing mid-calculation. He thought about the gallery going silent, 400 cadets who had settled in to watch a foregone conclusion and had watched something else entirely and had not yet, as far as he knew, produced any consensus about what to call it. He thought about the outcome column in the Vanguard program's 11-year record, the column that had never been filled in, and the entry that would need to go into it. He thought about the specialist's unanswered question and the fact that it would stay unanswered, because the answer was not something any of them, including Sienna, was likely to volunteer, and because the data they had showed a species that measured its own force to the millimeter and chose its ceiling deliberately, and what lay above that ceiling was a question the committee had elected not to put into formal language. Some questions Tharlos had found in 11 years of medical work were more useful as questions. He carried the scrunchie to the back wall of the booth, where a secondary storage locker sat beside the emergency analgesic reserve. The locker was a Class 9 restricted unit, the designation used for materials that required controlled handling due to their potential significance in ongoing incident reviews. He had used it 3 times in 11 years, once for a compromised drone core, once for a confiscated contraband substance, once for a piece of chitin plating involved in a weapons modification inquiry. He opened it. He placed the blue scrunchie inside, on the empty middle shelf, where it sat against the grey interior of the locker looking like what it was. A piece of ordinary synthetic fabric, bright blue, the kind of thing you could buy in any cadet supply depot for almost nothing. He closed the locker. He logged the placement in the incident record under materials retained for review. In the description field, he typed, "Personal item, blue synthetic hair accessory, recovered from diagnostic console after cadet dismissal, origin, Cadet Sienna, human, Earth." He paused. He added, in the classification field, the designation the committee had agreed on in the last 10 minutes of their session, before dispersing to begin drafting the enrollment database correction notice and the new engagement framework. Class 9, restricted, retain pending protocol review. He submitted the log entry. Then he opened the incident report he had filed with the blank field, the primary combatant at fault line. He filled it in now because he knew what to put there, and he knew why he had not known before. He had been asking the wrong question. The field assumed fault. The field assumed that an outcome of this kind required someone to have done something wrong. What had happened in the Sector 7 kill box was not a question of fault. It was a question of category. 3 days later, the Aegis Prime Director read Directive 44A into the formal record of the Vanguard Oversight Committee. It was 11 paragraphs. Tharlos had a copy because he was listed as a contributing witness to the incident that had produced it. He read it once, carefully. The operative language was in paragraph 4. Given the demonstrated capacity for precise, controlled, and deliberately restrained kinetic application by human cadets in high-load engagement scenarios, and given the significant divergence between prior homeworld classification data and confirmed biosphere parameters, the Vanguard Protocol is hereby amended to require separate engagement frameworks for human participants. Standard asymmetrical gauntlet formats are suspended for this cohort pending framework development. All future human cadet assignments are to be flagged for director-level review prior to implementation. Paragraph 7 noted that the enrollment database correction would be propagated to all institutional systems within 30 days. Paragraph 9 noted that Cadet Prime Gorv and the Vanguard Squad had been transferred to modified recovery protocols and were expected to return to training within 6 to 8 weeks. Paragraph 11 was 2 sentences. The Aegis Prime Proving Grounds does not currently possess an assessment framework adequate to evaluate human combatant capacity. Development of such a framework is the priority directive for the coming review cycle. Tharlos read paragraph 11 twice. He set the document down on his console. He looked at the Class 9 locker on the back wall. He thought about what the director had said in the committee room she was holding back, and about the way it had sat in the room after he said it, the way a true thing sits when the people hearing it are still working out what it means for everything they thought they knew before. He thought about 52. He thought about 4.2 seconds. He thought about a cadet who had walked into the Sector 7 kill box, waited for the buzzer, tied her hair back with a bright blue scrunchie, and dismantled the Academy's most confident assumption about what a soft-world species could do. Not in a blaze, not with volume, not with anything that could be called anger or spectacle. With the quiet, deliberate, fractional application of force that a predator uses when it has decided, for reasons of its own, not to use the rest. When a predator limits its own force, it is not showing mercy, it is measuring your fragility. He did not write that down. It did not need to be written down. It was the thing the force vector overlay had shown him, and the thing the specialist's unanswered question had pointed at, and the thing the director's two-sentence paragraph 11 was trying to say in the careful language of institutional directives. The Class 9 locker sat on the back wall of the Overwatch booth, grey and sealed, holding a piece of bright blue synthetic fabric on its middle shelf. Tharlos looked at it for a moment. Then he turned back to his console, pulled up the new intake queue for the following week's enrollment session, and went back to work.